Once the research report has been prepared and submitted, it needs to be evaluated. Let us now understand why is it essential to evaluate research report, what needs to be evaluated, what should be the parameters for evaluation, and who should evaluate the research report. Evaluation of research report serves a few important purposes. It helps to improve the quality of research because once a research report is evaluated, it tries to pinpoint the strengths and weaknesses and it helps the researcher to improve upon it. It enhances use of findings of research because a report which has been evaluated and found to be valid and reliable, the findings of research can be put to further use. It facilitates decision making. For example, the people who are submitting research reports for the award of degrees, maybe master's level or the doctoral level degree, the research report needs to be evaluated to take a decision whether to award a degree or not. It aids in planning future research because a report which is evaluated will pinpoint the weaknesses or the limitations in the report, and the researcher is thus benefited that he or she doesn't commit the similar mistakes in the future research, or it guides the researcher in taking further research. Identify competencies of researchers. Evaluation of research report helps in identifying the competencies which are possessed by the researcher and which are deficient in the researcher and thus can help in planning and implementing training programs for the researchers. Let's answer the next question: what needs to be evaluated? Any research report consists of preliminary pages which include the title page, the acknowledgements, the table of contents, the illustrations, the appendices or annexures. It may include abstract. Introduction is the first chapter in any research report which tries to build up the rationale for the study, provides the theoretical background, states the objectives of research, states the significance of research, and may also point out to the delimitations of the research. The second chapter normally is review of related literature, which provides synthesis of the already done research work in that area and identifies the gaps in research and helps the researcher in formulating the hypothesis. The third chapter of the report consists of methods and procedure, which details out the design for the research, the sample for the research, the sampling technique used to select the sample for the study, the measuring tools used in the study, the experimental procedure if it is an experimental study, or the data collection procedure used to collect the data for the study, and also includes statistical techniques used for analyzing the data. Next chapter is normally on analysis of data and results, which provides the analysis of the data and interprets the results and tries to relate the findings of the study with the findings of the previous studies. Summary and conclusions provides in brief the complete research which has been carried out, its introduction, the statement of objectives, the hypothesis for the study, the design used, the sample selected for the study, and the major findings of the study, and then it deals with the recommendations on the basis of the research or implications of research for the various stakeholders. The last part of the research report includes the references or the bibliography, which tries to include a list of the sources of information which have been accessed by the researcher, either studied or included in the part of the research report. So while you evaluate the research report, each part of the research report needs to be evaluated. For example, the preliminary pages, which consist of title page, acknowledgement, table of contents, list of tables, list of illustrations, and abstract. Here, it needs to be evaluated that the title page contains correct information, acknowledgement is concise, and the language used is appropriate. Table of content, list of table, list of illustration is primarily concerned with correctness of the content as included in the body of the report, and abstract is concise, complete, and correct. The introduction, which normally builds the rationale for the study, includes statement of the problem, objectives of the study or the research question, and significance of the problem. Needs to be evaluated on the basis of the adequacy of explanation, accuracy of the rationale built up for the study, and the coherence in presenting the ideas, the thoughts, the theoretical framework. The problem statements need to be clearly stated, so the clarity, and then the researchability, whether the problem is amenable to research or is it feasible to research that problem, the size of the research, whether a researcher could complete the work within 6 months or 1 year or 3 years, accessibility of the data. So whether the study demanded for a data which was accessible to the researcher, and objectives of the study need to be evaluated with respect to whether they are going to be significant questions which are to be answered, or whether the objectives have been correctly stated. Significance of the problem can be evaluated with respect to its clarity, adequacy of explanation. Review of related literature needs to be evaluated on the 5 parameters that it is complete, it doesn't have gaps. Both primary and secondary sources have been accessed by the researcher and they have been correctly synthesized, correctly reported, and there is clarity in the mind of the researcher while reporting the findings of previous studies. It is presented in a coherent manner that one idea takes you to another idea, and it is concise, and one paragraph at the most is written on one particular major issue. Next thing which needs to be evaluated is the conclusions arrived at on the basis of review of related literature. So is there clarity in the researcher with respect to the major conclusions related to the various variables which form a part of the research, and whether conclusions have been appropriately and correctly arrived at by the researcher. Whether the researcher has identified the gaps in research correctly and is able to express them in clear terms, then the hypotheses need to be evaluated with respect to whether they have been correctly formulated and are these hypotheses testable, and is the number of hypotheses adequate, or few more hypotheses could be formulated for this study. The chapter on methods and procedures, which include design, sample, measuring tools, experimental procedure, collection of data, and statistical technique, would be evaluated on the basis of appropriateness, feasibility, and accuracy in description of design for the study. So, if the researcher has taken survey design or the researcher has selected ex post facto or experimental research design, was that design appropriate to answer the stated research questions? This is the question which need to be answered. Sample can be evaluated on the basis of its adequacy, correctness of the sampling technique, and the adequacy of explanation put forth for selecting the sample. Measuring tools which have been used need to be evaluated whether the tool selected by the researcher was appropriate and was valid and reliable measure of the variable included in the study, and was it a tool which could be used in different contexts, different cultures, and provided objective information, and whether the researcher has given adequate explanation of the tools used in the research study and substantiated its relevance in the context. Experimental studies include in detail the experimental procedure, so it needs to be evaluated with respect to the adequacy of explanation and the internal and external validity, whether that has been taken care of in the experimental study, what parameters or the variables were controlled, how extraneous variables were controlled, how long the treatment was given to the experimental group, and so on. Collection of data, whether the procedure was followed as specified or not, or whether the procedure was appropriate to the kind of tools which have been used in the study or not. The statistical techniques used for analysis of data need to be evaluated whether the statistical techniques used helps the researcher to answer the research questions or test the hypothesis formulated for the study. Analysis of data and results is an important chapter in the research report, and it actually demonstrates the intellectual scholarship of the researcher. So, how the results of the study have been presented, whether the major questions or objectives or hypotheses have been addressed by the researcher, and whether the presentation of results has been accurate and adequate explanation has been given for the results. Tables and illustrations can be evaluated with respect to their correctness, or whether the tables summarize the results or they give results as obtained through SPSS, and the quality of tables, quality of illustrations can be evaluated. Interpretation of results is evaluated with respect to their correctness and whether the results interpreted by the researcher are related to the previous findings of the studies undertaken in the field, whether the findings of the study are in agreement or disagreement with the work which has already been carried out. So it is a very crucial chapter in the research report and it requires careful evaluation. Summary and conclusions is the last chapter in the research report, and one needs to evaluate whether the summary includes the major elements of the research report. That means whether it gives introduction, a brief review of related literature, the gaps in research, then objectives of the study, hypothesis of the study, design used in the study, sample of the study, and major findings of the study, followed by the implications of research for various stakeholders and the recommendations. Summary needs to be concise and correct. So there has to be match between what has been reported in the body of research and the summary, and the conclusions which have been drawn on the basis of the findings of the study, they need to be appropriate. The researcher need not generalize the things which he or she has not studied. Recommendations for the research needs to be evaluated with respect to their appropriateness, and with respect to the implications of research, it has to be evaluated with respect to its appropriateness and whether the implications has been made for the various stakeholders interested in research. So these are the major parameters of evaluating the research report, and on the basis of these parameters, the rubrics can be designed by the evaluators. References and bibliography and the annexures, they need to be evaluated on the basis of whether the APA styles have been correctly followed by the researcher and whether the references and bibliography are complete and all the works which have been cited or referred to form a part of the references and bibliography. Annexures, if at all included in research report, needs to be relevant to the people who read the research report and are relevant to the data or relevant to the work which has been carried out. Other aspects which need to be evaluated in journal can include how the report has been organized, whether the sequencing of the chapter is appropriate or not, whether the formatting of the report is as per the specified standards by the university or by the organization to which it is being submitted, the language correctness and appropriateness of language, the grammatical correctness of the language, and the coherence that needs to be there among the various parts of the report and within one chapter, transition from one idea to another. Then readability of report and intellectual scholarship of the researcher needs to be evaluated. So the next few slides give you at a glance the rubric which can be used to evaluate the research report. Now here you will see that three classifications have been used: good, satisfactory, and poor, and the various chapters which form a part of the research report, they are indicated, and the parameters which need to be taken into consideration for evaluating these various parts of the research report are indicated. Here you can see for review of related literature and methods and procedure, then analysis of results, summary and conclusions, and bibliography and references. The next question is, who should evaluate? The report can be evaluated by the researcher himself or herself, the supervisor or the guide for the research work, the expert who is a part of committee to evaluate the research report, and the funding agency in case of a sponsored research.